Dr. Stanford, it is such an honor to have you with us today. This is actually my very first interview as the new president of Hope for Brighter Tomorrows. And I have to tell you that this topic could not be any closer to my heart, and I think to the very core hearts of the moms that we are trying to serve through our ministries here at Hope for Brighter Tomorrows and through the work of the Breathe Retreats. So first, I just want to say thank you to you, Dr. Stanford, for all you have done in this area. It is a blessing to know that there are people like you out there advocating for families, for individuals, for everyone affected by mental illness. And so
Thank you.
thank you for being with us. I'd like to just start by saying, in caring for our children with serious mental illness, as you know so well, it really takes a toll. And sometimes it's hard to even talk about or describe. I can say for myself, because I feel almost selfish even talking about it, because my kids suffer so much more than we do. However, I do have to confess, we have also suffered quite a lot. Whether it's fear for our safety during times of decompensation, whether it is incredibly loud noise from screaming, whether it is raw emotional fear from not knowing if you're going to receive that call that your child has died by suicide. Basically, our daily lives consist of things about which most people have nightmares. And so could you just jump in and kind of speak to us moms in particular about what is happening to us as we try to walk well with our children through their suffering? Can you give words to what it is that happens to us and what we might be experiencing along the way?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one of the problems is when it's one of our family, when it's our child. I think a lot of times we don't think about that as traumatic to us. We think about they're going through the trauma, they're the ones that's suffering. And what we have to understand is that, from a psychological perspective, when we talk about people having, for instance, post-traumatic stress disorder, one of the ways that you can acquire post-traumatic stress disorder is by a close loved one or a friend experiencing a traumatic event, or you watching that or seeing violence, even in some instances hearing about a particularly violent event. So you're literally watching someone that you care for suffer, and that is traumatizing to you. And I think a lot of times parents don't really put it into that context, that they are experiencing a trauma by watching the suffering of their child. They're only focused on trying to help their child be better, and not realizing that it's taking a significant psychological toll on them as well, both mentally and physically. And I think that's where we kind of get into the idea that, we find all the time parents don't take care of themselves as they try to take care of their suffering child. And that ultimately leads to tremendous burnout. And at some point, oftentimes a parent will have a lot of guilt and shame because they begin to even resent the child because of the suffering that they're going, but they really don't know how to contextualize that well. So there's a whole lot going on there. But I think the most important thing first is to realize that while your child is suffering, you are experiencing trauma as a result of that.
And I think one of the hard parts, though, when we talk about recognizing this, I think it can be really easy to get at one end of the spectrum or another, where we either kind of deny and minimize the impact on us because we know and believe with everything in us that we wish we could take the place of our child. I can't tell you the number of times I've said to my children, I wish I could take this off you onto myself. And so there's either that end of the spectrum, or when it does come time sometimes where you just reach that absolute wall, as you just alluded to, sometimes you can feel really angry and really upset and have a really clear sense of, I'm not going to be okay if I don't get some space. And so we have sort of these two extremes on either end. How do we balance that and kind of stay in a place that helps us to continue to go on? I know it's important that we take care of ourselves. But I know for me, and I know I've experienced this with many other moms who are similarly situated, it kind of makes you feel like you just want to laugh because, like, and when are we supposed to do that?
Right,
And what does
right,
that look like? And it reminds me, I have no idea who said this. This is not my saying, but I love it. And it's the idea that saying self-care to somebody who needs community care and
right,
needs support is just additional burdens upon us. And so, what do we do with all that? Help us.
right. Yeah, I think the first thing is what we just talked about, and that is recognizing that you are experiencing that isn't just about your child, it's what it's doing to you and to your family. So mental health issues are not just about the person with the mental health issue. It's like a bomb going off and there's a
Mhm.
concussion wave that goes out. So you really have to recognize, I mean, you think about, soldiers in combat, they don't have to be standing next to the bomb and catch shrapnel to be damaged. They can get a head injury just from the concussion wave that comes out. So you're being affected. So you have to recognize that first. I think the next thing is you have to say, and you're right, people throw the term self-care around. I said it just a minute ago. How can you care for yourself when you're already a mess? I mean, that's kind of putting a burden on you. You really have to recognize that you just can't do it alone. And the while the first person you probably tend to turn to try to get support are those closest to you that may themselves be damaged by what's going on. A lot of times they're not the best people that can help you. So a mom then trying to get the husband to help, her care for herself when he's struggling. So you really need to, start to look for close friends, relatives that are maybe slightly separated from the day to day. And that's also a great place where the church can come in and come alongside families. And, we have a support group that we set up for family members that are caring for a loved one and in churches around the country. And I always say it's the easiest support group to set up because everybody that has a loved one that they're caring for needs support. And so, you don't have to, you just need to be there. You just need to be present. And so getting that kind of a support team around you, somebody that you can talk to, somebody that can take you out for coffee, somebody that can go buy your groceries for you when you just can't do it on a day, just those very simple little things. And I think that's the other thing is you got to understand that it's not about some unbelievable piece of wisdom they're going to give you or so. It's just very little things. I once had a chapter in a book where I said, it was called, loaves and fishes because little things matter. I mean, and that's really, somebody just coming over and bringing you dinner one evening when they know you've been having a bad day can really make a difference. And so recognition of that you are being affected in a negative way, setting up kind of a support system around you. And that may include professionals, having a support group you go to, having a counselor you go to. And you mentioned, and I'll go to the third thing. You mentioned this idea of like you say to yourself, well, when am I going to have time to do that? And
Right.
there's also another aspect of that is I'm not the one that's ill. So I don't need to worry about me. I need to worry about my child. And so I think what you have to do is you have to understand that just because your child has a mental health problem does not mean you had to stop living. It doesn't mean that you don't still need joy in your life and friendship in your life and fellowship and a relationship with God and all the things everybody needs. Those don't just stop. And if they do, then you become less of a living dynamic being and you start to fall apart. And if you fall apart, I mean, I know every guilty mom that's caring for a child with mental illness will understand what I'm about to say. If you fall apart, who's going to care for them? Okay. And so you can do it from almost a guilt. I don't recommend it, but almost a guilt perspective of I have to care for my child, so I have to care for myself. And there really is a truth in that. And so you have to kind of let go of these ideas that it's not about me. I'm not the one that needs help. It's selfish of me to worry about myself. It's selfish of me to go out and drink coffee when my child is at home or whatever. No, it's not, because you still are a living and breathing being, and you have a life, and you have to continue to have a life. And the healthier you are, and the more of a quality model for dealing with difficult emotions and dealing with difficult problems and taking care of yourself and caring for yourself and loving God, then the much better model and caregiver you're going to be for your child. So that's part of being a good caregiver. And then I think the last thing I would say is this: you have to let go of this idea of being a perfect caregiver, because there is no perfect caregiving, period. Okay. And you're going to mess up, and others are going to mess up, and that's okay. And there's going to be a huge separation between perfect, what you want to do, how you want to care, and how you end up actually caring. Because it's not always about, you're not always in control of that. You may want to do things that you just financially don't have the resources for. You may want to do things that you just don't have the time for, not because you don't want to do them, but, and so you have to wake up every day and you have to say, you have to ground yourself in the character of God and in your identity in Christ. And you have to say, it's another day and you're going to walk along with me, and I'm going to do this all out of love that you're going to fill me with. And so if my caregiving, quote unquote, falls short of what I might think is perfect caregiving, it was caregiving out of love, and it was what I could bring to the table today.
That's good. That's a good paradigm shift. I think what's so difficult is that we can know intellectually what you're saying is absolutely the truth, and then somehow trying to execute that in our daily lives when we're living with those things we started out talking about, with the violence, with the uncertainty, with the fear. I mean, just the fear, the daily fear of having 1, 2, 3, or more children who could at any day be gone, who could die. Can you just talk about the psychological toll of that? And what are some things that you've discovered that somehow help parents walk through that day to day? Because I do think it's something that almost no one except those who have lived through it have experience with, and those who have helped us. But, you talked earlier about, extended family support or friends or church, and we'll come back to this, but a lot of people have tried all those things and they're still alone. Still dealing with that significant level of fear. Can you help us understand?
Right. Well, I would start
help
out,
us.
you've got to start out with understanding that the situation you're in is an overwhelming situation. There is no one, period, that is equipped to deal with it. Period. No one. There's no book that's ever been written. There's no, there's no guru out there you could sit down with and he or she's going to give you the 8 things. That is absolutely overwhelming situation that you simply cannot handle on your own, period. There's no other discussion. I've never in all my career ever met a parent that could handle it on their own. They don't exist. And you've got to let yourself off the hook on that. And then what you have to say to yourself is, recognizing that I can't handle this on my own, I have to get other people involved. We'll talk about that, be that professionals or others. And so saying that to yourself, you now say, okay, well, if it's overwhelming, I cannot fix this. And this is the hardest thing for not just a parent, but really almost anybody, because we are obsessed with control, particularly men are fixers. So, I see a lot of times with families I work with, the mom, they want to try to love it out of them, and the dad wants to kind of punish it out of them. So, he just needs to go out and get a job. He just needs to try harder. And the mom's like, well, we didn't do this and I just need to, let this, moms tend to be greater enablers than the fathers. Fathers tend to be overly authoritarian. And that's our obsession with control. Well, if it's overwhelming, you don't have control, okay? You have limited control. And mostly your control is about getting your child to the resources that are necessary to get them help, and then to provide them with the support and a foundation for recovery. You're not going to fix this, period. So now what you have, once you've accepted those two things, you say, okay, well, what are my child's needs? What are their primary needs? Just literally sit down and write them down. Well, they're delusional. They're suicidal. They're, okay, well, what, within the mental health community, what does it say? If my child's suicidal, what resources does he or she need? If they're delusional, what resources do they need? And then, and then you also in those needs, you're going to have a list of what are my needs,
Mm.
and what are the resources are going to, I'm going to need somebody that can help me with transportation. I'm going to need, and so you begin to kind of break it down. If you look at the big problem, you just walk away from it because it's a giant mountain. You've got to break it down into little tiny things. And you're going to find on that list, there are things that you actually can have huge impacts on. And when you have those impacts, then the other things start to kind of maybe pull apart. So
Can
one
I
of the,
interrupt you? Can I ask a such as when you say there are
absolutely.
little things that will really make a big difference? Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Sorry to interrupt you, but
Yeah, it might be simple things like, if you're, it could be as simple as, at the beginning, finding appropriate mental health care, someone that they connect with, that they feel comfortable seeing, or it might be something as simple as making sure that they're eating healthy, or that you're providing them with some exercise every day, or getting them out of the house. I mean, it can be little things that can make a huge difference. And so giving them some purpose, if your child, I remember a family where they had an adult son who had mental health problems, and he basically just had no purpose in life. He just basically had become one of the discarded. And you see that a lot of times. He just sits in his room all day, plays video games. And it started by, we had to say, okay, what can we give him to do every day that he will always be successful at? And his mother said to me, well, sometimes I'll empty the dishwasher. I said, there we go. You're going to go home this evening and say, every evening, I'd like you to empty the dishwasher for me. And he started emptying the dishwasher every evening. And from that, it went to, you're going to feed the dog every day. And from that, it went, and then over time, he had a whole set of engaging chores and involvement in the family. He no longer sat in his room all day and watch video games. He became an engaged part of he was still mentally ill. He was still struggling with delusions and things like that, but their communication became better because he was successful at the things that we gave him to do. It wasn't like, I want you to go out today and find a job.
right.
These kind of impossible, and you might say emptying the dishwasher, that's meaningless. That's hugely important. And
Yeah.
so, you have to start where there's going to be success. You don't set someone up for failure. So laying out those needs, one of the needs may be that they need purpose. One of the needs may be that they need a friend. I mean, there's a lot of things like, with our young adult males that come into the clinic. I mean, one of the when we have goal setting we do at the beginning before they begin the whole year-long treatment. I mean, I can't tell you how many of those guys, one of their goals is to get a girlfriend,
Mm.
and really, I mean, that's their goal. This is kind of their grand, but the reality is they really just want some companionship, and so, and then you take that goal and you break that down. Okay, well, what is keeping you from having that right now? What are the little things? Well, I'm really I don't like to go out. I'm very fearful to go out, or I have, no. And so then you break it all down, and breaking things down like that, writing it down, sitting down with a trusted friend and saying, okay, look at this list. Which of these can I have an impact on? And thinking about it like that, rather than my son has schizoaffective disorder and I've got to fix that.
Mm.
Okay, I mean, you could bring that to me and I'm not exactly sure. I'm going to break it all down. Okay, or what symptoms are active? How is his home life? Is he sleeping well? I mean, sleep, that's another thing. Sleeping effectively. These things all make a huge difference because, we're a whole person. We're not just a disorder. And so I think, the loved one, the family member, the caregiver has to do the same thing for themselves. Well, I'm not sleeping well. I'm not eating right. I don't get any exercise. Well, then no wonder you're so frustrated and falling apart and you don't have any energy to do this anymore because it's overwhelming. And so we're going to care for the whole family, not just about the person that's ill.
So we really, as parents, have to be willing to take the risk. I mean, because it feels like a great risk, I have to tell you, and I don't mean to be contrarian, but as I hear you
No,
talk, I
please.
think that a lot of the moms that I know, and from my experience, we would say, that's really great about the dishwasher, but until you have a child who's willing and
Right,
to do something. And I think for so many people, they're dealing with the kids who have shut down and and adults into adulthood, and they aren't willing. They will
right,
not. One of the things I've said to my kids over and over in various psychiatric hospitals, frankly, is honey, we know that you can't just snap your fingers and be better. The only decision that we are asking you to make is to cooperate with the help that is being provided to you. Simply cooperate with the help if you can. That's the only choice for you to make. And I think for so many of our Breathe Retreat moms, they're dealing with their precious son or daughter who simply will not make that choice. And
right.
so what do we do then?
Well, and I think, actually being involved in your treatment is tremendously important. But you're right. That's, mental illness is one of the, if not the only illness where the person will argue with you that they don't really need that care. If they, even in instances where they have awareness or don't have awareness, in instances in which you don't have awareness of your own illness, it's a whole nother
Yeah.
issue. So no, I totally agree. I'm, this individual, that's why we sat down and I said, what does he do? What does he do? What would he do? And it could be as simple as take your medicine every day. I mean, I've had clients that were not particularly nice to their families, but they were willing to take their medicine every day, and then being praised for that. I mean,
Sure.
you have to sit down and have to find something that they are able to do that they can be successful at, because that's the key.
Okay.
Success, because success will build more success. Success is something that you can praise. Success is something that you can look at and say, look, we are seeing a change. We are seeing progress here, even though that progress may be tiny.
Yeah.
And so, maybe it would be, and I know this sounds somewhat ridiculous, but when we're in this world, maybe it would be you've really had a problem using offensive language, and over the last week you haven't used it one time. That's incredible. Let's keep
That
that
would
up.
be.
Let's see if we can do that. I mean,
Yeah.
again, I get it. I mean, I see this every day. I'm not living it in my home, but I see it in families every day. And when you get to that point where you're like, they won't do anything, it's true. They won't do what you want them to do, but they are doing things. And that's why you have to look at what is it they're willing to do, what is it they're doing. The other thing is, and the difficult thing here is, particularly when you're dealing with young adults that have mental health problems, is you do have to involve them in what's going on. And
Yeah.
we live in a society that once they're 18 years old, they get to make their own decisions when it comes to care, unless you have a guardianship over them.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, this is a statistic that or a little research study that I've always kind of quote. And so to try to build hope in those families where the loved one just will not get care. Okay. And so number one, I say this: you can't make other people do what you want them to do. You can only change your own behavior. You can't change other people's behavior. Okay. And so you can only work on yourself, and you can only point people to the resources they need. But there was a study done that showed if you take the families of individuals with serious mental illness that are not receiving treatment, so probably refusing treatment, and you put those families in a psychoeducation support group. So the caregivers go to this psychoeducational support group where they learn about the illness, they learn about the things that come with it, and they have some support from other family members that are in there. You see improvement in the individuals that aren't receiving treatment.
Hmm. That's interesting.
And so you
That
got to
goes to
keep.
that point you made earlier about how we really are helping our loved ones when we do take care of
Right.
ourselves, which is a hard thing.
Yes.
I'm even noticing as I'm having this discussion with you, I'm supposed to be focusing on caregivers. And as the caregiver, I'm back to, well, wait, how can I
Right.
better help my child? So let's get back to the
Mm.
caregivers. One of the things that was really helpful to me that that my therapist helped me think about, for example, movement, right? We know that for us caregivers, for everyone, moving our bodies is so important. Well, to me, when I would hear that, I wanted to strangle someone because you're giving me one more thing I have to
Right.
do or I ought to do. I mean, there was a time in my life when I couldn't even hear the sound of someone's voice if they were going to try to tell me one more thing I ought or should do. And what my therapist said to me was, well, no, of course you're not going to want to move your body and get exercise if you're thinking of it that way. And she said, I think of it as a gift. And I actually have begun to notice how much better I feel when I just walk. And so I tried to do that. I tried to notice, and I was like, I know I'm a little slow on the uptake, but I was like, well, lo and behold, I do feel better when I move. And so realizing that some of the things that the self-care and the things we need to do to take care of ourselves can just feel like more chore. But how can we help ourselves to know that while it might be a chore in the point of decision, we will actually feel better?
Right. No, I mean, that's a good advice that you got there. I mean, it doesn't, when the first thing you want to do when you have a moment is you want to go climb into bed and isolate yourself and not listen to anything and be quiet and still and rest. And there's nothing wrong with rest. That needs to be built into your self-care. You need to have those quiet away moments. And what I'd say a lot of times is you need to have opportunities to not think about your child. Is what you need. You need time where you can, you don't need to go for a walk and the whole time you're walking, you're thinking, oh my gosh, when I get back, I got to do this, I got to do this, and he did this
Yeah,
morning, and
yeah,
that's not going to be real helpful. So, but what you do is you have to kind of have two kind of lists that you make in your head. One is what does a healthy adult need to stay healthy? I mean, those are the obvious. They got to sleep well, they got to eat right, they got to have some activity. What are those things? And then you've got to say, well, where is that in my life? How is my life? And then you have another list who said, what do I enjoy doing? I mean, and that would be what did I enjoy doing before this fell into my lap? What did I like to garden, I like to go to movies, I like to, and then you have to tell yourself there's no reason that you shouldn't be still doing those things. And those have to be built in as well. And so, the obvious thing that happens for everybody, not just those that are caregiving, but when we get busy and we get stressed, we don't sleep as well, we eat a lot of processed food, we give up on the exercise, we sit around a lot, and so, and then we tend to not, and then we just feel kind of, we don't have any energy to go do anything. Well, you will have more energy if you're more physically healthy. And so you just have to, that's just for anybody, whether they are a caregiver or not. The caregiver part of it just makes it seem, there's just that kind of guilt thing, like, how dare I say I want to go see a movie when
right,
my child is
right.
suicidal,
Well, and
and
Doc, let's get right at this. This
yeah,
is this is where that courage part I was talking about earlier, and forgive me for interrupting you. Just I have so many questions. And the spiritual part, I think, where we really need, well, we always need the Lord so desperately, but it takes so much courage to make a decision that you will do something like you just said, because when we have done that in the past, maybe we've come back to a child totally decompensated.
mhm,
Maybe we've come back to a child that has cut themselves up over the grief of us not being there for them. Or God forbid, what if we make that choice to do that, Doc, and our kid dies? Like,
right.
how do we get to the point of being able to have the courage to make those choices, understanding the truth of what you said about the long haul, knowing there's such a high risk involved potentially?
Right. Well, I mean, we're not foolish in what we do. So, I mean, if you have a child who is involved in those behaviors, particularly when they're left alone, and that's what you're afraid of, well, then you make sure that there's a trusted individual there. I mean, you make arrangements, but the thing is,
I just
you've
have to
got it.
stop you there, though. You make a
Yes,
ring because I just know I can hear the
I
chorus of
know.
moms in my
They're like,
ear.
who's going to do that for me?
Make
Yeah,
arrangements.
yeah.
Are you
Who?
kidding? The one time my husband and I tried to do this once, and I have permission from my son to mention this. There's one person in our life
Right.
who's not too scared, who is be willing. And so she was there with him, and we went to try to go see a concert. And
Hmm.
before the concert began, we got the 911 calls, and our son had completely decompensated. He had a knife in his hand. He had the knife to his throat, and our friend, the only person, and we came, and we have wonderful, beautiful, loving extended family. No, everybody's too scared. They're not
Right.
touching
No,
us.
I
And
understand.
so we had to literally race home. She had to throw a shoe at him to try to make sure that he didn't hurt himself with that knife.
Right.
So, and he had been pretty stable for him before we
Right.
left. And so the lesson
Well,
I learned,
never
oh,
go out. Right.
yeah,
That's
and
what
that's
you
another
learn.
thing. Line of sight supervision is what so many of us need help being able to provide, because
Right.
our teenagers, particularly our teenagers of that period of impulsivity, are so dangerous to themselves. And so even spiritually, if you could help, because I think the answer is spiritual. I think there is only from God can we get the kind of strength we need to keep walking this through. Can you share some of what you've seen and how people have allowed the Lord to help them and to make some progress caring for themselves, which then also help their loved ones?
Yeah. I'm going to go back to the other one first, though.
Okay.
First off, it's not your fault that happened. It's not your fault for going out that happened. That might have happened if you'd stayed there, for all we know. I mean, so the thing is that that's not your fault. I'm not saying that you didn't need to go back and take care of the situation. I also would say this: every situation is different. Every child or adult is different, and you don't start out. I'm not saying you were doing this, but you don't start out with going away. You start out with building up, and you start with small. So maybe it was like, we're going to sit down tonight and watch a movie. Maybe that's the first thing you ever do, or we're going to put him in the back seat, and we're going to drive down, and we're going to get a coffee at Starbucks and come home. You know what I'm saying? You build up over time, and so you always have to take into account the stability of the individual that you're caring for. Now, as far as getting people to help you, you're right. The more extreme the situation, which is clearly, and I know a lot of your situation, it's very extreme. Not everybody's is that extreme, and so you can get, but you also have to, you have to help educate those around you of what they should be fearful of and not fearful of, and so that you can kind of help build that up. Again, that's why, to segue into the spiritual aspect, that's why it's so important for churches to be more actively involved in families that have these problems, and really to help their congregants understand what's going on. Not that you can always get somebody. I mean, there are situations where I would never have somebody come and stay with the individual. It's just not safe. Not that the person might hurt them, but they might hurt themselves. And so, but you can always build it up. So I want to make sure that everybody understands. I'm not saying like you should just say, hey, my next door neighbor is going to stay with him, and we're going to go to, we're going to Monte Carlo, and so
Going clubbing.
what I'm saying is that you have to figure it out within your situation. Now, as far as the, finding the strength to be able to do that, I think it really, and it's easy to say, but it's hard to put in place. I mean, we really do have to understand that ultimately, in the end of the day, we are not in control, and we live in a fallen world, and horrible things like mental illness happen, and they happen to our children, and they happen to our friends, and there's horrible suffering. The fact that, as I've told groups I've worked with before, the fact that anything good happens in this world is a reflection that there's a God, because it is a fallen and broken world, and so we have to remember that He is in control. We have to remember that we are now citizens of heaven, and that we can trust Him, and we can even trust Him in the horrible situation in which we lose one of our loved ones. It's not our fault that that loved one passed away. There's, if someone takes their life, it's not, there's nothing ultimately. I mean, I always say this, as a mental health care provider, we have clients that take their lives, and sometimes clients that take their lives right after they saw us. If we didn't see it and couldn't stop it, an untrained individual is less likely to pick up on it. Yeah, there's some signs, but it's not always clear. And it's tragic. It's absolutely tragic. But at the end of the day, it's not your fault, and it's really about caregiving out of love. And so, your child with a mental health problem has different needs, has some of the same needs, but a lot of different needs than the child who doesn't. But the needs that you try to meet of a child without mental illness, you do without love, and you screw up sometimes. And you do the same thing with a child with mental illness, which is an overwhelming situation. And so I think that we really have to step back and we have to say, this is a situation in which I'm overwhelmed. Anyone would be. It's not just me. This is a situation that's reflective of a fallen world. It's not my fault. It's not my child's fault. There's nothing that could have stopped this from happening. There are ways to mitigate it, to minimize the symptoms, and I'm going to try to get my child to that. But the only way that I'm going to be able to be empowered to walk through this is if every day I look to him, and every day I say, I don't have any control over this, and I don't get it, and it sucks. And hey, I don't like it. I don't like that this is going on in my life, and I don't think it's fair, but I also believe you exist, and I believe you have good for me, and I'm going to just turn to you every day because maybe the sad thing to say is this: well, what else do you have? Right. What else do you have that's consistent, that's unchanging? What else do you have that says there's a bigger plan here, and this is just part of the mess of what I'm trying to fix up? Because the world doesn't tell you that. The world says, oh, okay, well, we'll throw some meds at them, we'll do this. And then when they get really bad, they say, well, what we need to do? We need to institutionalize them. Let's institutionalize them. And I mean, at best, what we're looking at is minimizing suffering. That's what the mental health system will try to help you do, which is a great thing. Nothing wrong with that. But they're not going to fix it. They're going to minimize it. Yeah. And so, we have to say, this is, to some extent, this is the life that we have as a family. And so what we have to do is maybe we have to move out some of our expectations. Maybe we have to change some of our ideas, but we still can have a life as a family that is meaningful. And we have to take care of each other, and we have to take care of ourselves. And, again, it's all easy to say, but it's hard to put into practice. But I will say this: just because it's easy to say doesn't mean it's not right. Right. And just because it's hard to put into practice doesn't mean it isn't the right thing to do. And so at a minimum, if you're out there and you're just you and your husband, or you and whoever it is desperately trying to care for this, adolescent or child with a mental health problem, or even an adult with a mental health problem, and it's just killing you, the first thing to ask yourself is, am I doing this all on my own? And again, I understand that a lot of people just run away from you. I get it. Okay. I've seen it. Okay. But that's not the question you just asked. The question you ask is, am I doing this on my own? And if you are doing it on your own, well, then it's time to try to start to put a support team around you. And you might be able to start, if you don't know any individually, with a support group. They're not going to run away from you. So, right. And then, or a professional that you can just sit down with and just cry, or it'll be there. And then you can begin to build out from there. And so, there's just no reason to do it all on your own. Yes. And it can't be done all on your own.
That's for sure. Yeah. So us parents we need our own, if we need our own meds. Maybe we need our own therapists. We need our own time. Right. I want to close, Doctor, with this, spiritually, the things that have helped me the most. I felt like was when the Lord really, I don't know. I feel like he just led me to realize that acceptance, which you just talked about, and Kay talks about so often and so well, and gratitude, acceptance and gratitude would really change things for me instead of being stuck in that cycle of how can this be my life? How can this be my life? Even after 10 years, I'm still in the cycle of how can this be my life? How can still grieving what I wished it would have been and all the things. But those things with boundaries, and then this is a biggie, and I hope this, I'd love for you to speak to this. On the spiritual side, for me, it was the kind of the shift in recognizing that God is near not only to my brokenhearted loved one, but he is near to my broken heart. And I don't know if it's just my, I don't know if it's shame or just my own religious upbringing. I'm not sure. But for me, it was always like, oh, what do I need to do better, God? And what else am I not? Like like even the spiritual part became like this burden, like I'm not praying the right way, I'm not saying the right things, or I'm not praying enough. Um, and it was realizing that God wants to be with me. God is with me, not wants to be, he is with me, and he loves me, and he cares that I'm hurting too. And when I allowed for that, being loved by him to be the centerpiece of my spiritual walk with him, more than all the anxiety around what I wasn't doing properly, it really helped. Can you talk about maybe that or just other
Yeah.
spiritual things where you've seen people be better, caregivers be better for the long haul?
Yeah, I think that, the first thing that the person of faith has to do is try to understand that, this isn't a punishment that's
Mm,
been put upon them, and that God is still good and in control, even though this terrible thing is happening in your life, because terrible things happen everywhere all the time. I think it's when it comes, we forget that. And then when it's in our life, we're like, oh, well, now he's bad. He's not a good God anymore. And so you have to understand that this is a reflection of a fallen world. And like you said, just because we're now having this difficult circumstance, it doesn't change who God is, and it doesn't change our desperate need for him. And so I think a lot of times what we do is we think, well, he's either punishing me for something I didn't do right. And so, like you said, we try to do it all right. I got to pray more. I got to go to church more. I got to go do this. I got to read more. I got to do more. And then that'll fix everything. Or he's not good. Not saying I don't run across a lot of people that just don't believe anymore, but he's not good. So see, he's just not really someone worth having a relationship with, because look at my life.
mm,
And because I'm one of his followers and look how bad my life is, well, then that's this idea that's kind of works-based kind of, and we again forget we're in a fallen world. That's not anyone's fault but our own that we're in this fallen world. And so if we pursue him, then we are comforted and we grow in that relationship. And then we also have, as we do that, we also understand that our child has the same spiritual needs that we do.
mm,
So we can become more of a reflection of what it is to have a healthy, growing relationship with God for them, because that modeling is what's going to be tremendously important. And we have to let go what we hear from other people, or, in churches, somebody tell you, oh, we just need to pray more or whatever. I mean, that's just not even reality. And we have to look to the desperate parents in the scriptures, and see what they did. And they called upon the Lord. And it didn't always end well. It doesn't always end well, but it always ends well in the grander scheme of things. And we have to remember that there will come a time where your child will not have a mental health problem anymore. And there will come a time when you won't have to care for them anymore. And there will come a time when we are in the presence of the Lord. And this is just a whisper of time here on this earth. It's meaningful for some reason. We don't really understand why that is, but it is an opportunity for us to be absolutely desperate for him.
mm.
Because again, in the end, and I know maybe it doesn't sound quite as Christian as it should, what else do we have?
Yeah.
I
To whom
mean,
else would we go? Mm,
it's like, if your faith is in psychiatry, and again, I'm in the mental health field. I love mental health treatment. I think there's a lot of very effective treatment. I mean, it works sometimes and sometimes it doesn't. And then, as you said, you have clients who engage and clients who don't engage. And so it's real hit and miss. At the end of the day, God is always present. God is always empowering. God is always comforting. That's your best fuel to get through this situation. But that being said, we have to remember that Jesus took time to rest. Jesus took time to be with his friends. Jesus took time to pray. Emulating what he was going through, the suffering he went through, the struggles he went through, we see that he took time even to care for himself. And so that's what God would have for you. And so again, back to the church, the churches should be absolute havens for people in these circumstances, and they should be walking alongside you. If you're at a church that isn't, I suggest you find another church, because there are churches out there that do that. And those are the churches that are really, they really have the heart of God for those who suffer.
Beautiful. Will you pray, Dr. Stanford, for all of the parents that are watching, that they would be able to, that we would be able to really deeply know that love of God, and that through him we do have, as you just described it, we do have hope for brighter tomorrows. If you'd pray, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Father, I just lift up all those that are struggling to care for someone with a mental health problem. And I just pray that you would first just give them your peace and your comfort, that they would know your presence in a new way today, that they would recognize that you're present with them, that you're comforting them, you're empowering them, that you're even providing for them, even though they may not recognize it. I pray that you would lead your people to come around them, that they would be there to be supportive and comforting, that they would offer words of wisdom, not words of judgment or pain. I pray healing on their children, on the adults they care for. I pray that you would give us a new perspective on what it is to be a citizen of heaven, that while we spiritually sit at the right hand with Christ, we stand in a fallen world where there's suffering and loss, and that we would keep our eyes fixed on you. I just pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you so much, Doctor.
Well,
Thank you
thank
for the
you.
work you do. Thank you for being a beacon and a leader in this field, and for caring about our families. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.